All right, thanks, Russell. Great to see everybody today. So we're in a series on Job, one of the most challenging books in the Bible, and particularly in the Hebrew Bible, right? But we're talking about friendship today. In Job, we're going to see some examples of what not to do as a friend, right? Some toxic friendship elements, but we're going to also balance that out with, well, how do we really be a good friend to somebody as well? And I think about my parents are here. Many of you have met them. And one of the things that I value about my parents is that they have been people who have stayed in touch with family and friends since they were kids. Like they literally have friends that they grew up with or friends that they've known in their early years that they have stayed in touch with over the course of their lifetime, and extended family as well. And so I've just always loved the fact that there's just this huge collection of friends and family that I have related to now for over 60 years that I've been in existence on this planet. I'm so grateful for being raised in a family that valued friendship and family and did the things that it took to stay in touch and love those people through over the long course of time. And, I'm thankful I've had friends over the long course of time. My closest friend that I grew up with in Prairie Village, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, has actually visited this church, and his dad is 99 years old, and they attended my dad's 90th birthday party, right? And so I'm so thankful for that. My freshman roommate in college, I was a potluck roommate with this guy from Golden, Colorado. And the only thing I knew about Golden, Colorado was Coors beer, right? But my roommate, he was a pastor in training, and we got put together as roommates at Baylor University. And we ended up backpacking together, and we've been friends now for going on over 40 years. Backpacked all over the country together and gone through a lot of life together. And I was explaining to him just not too long ago about how, one thing about me is that I don't remember details very well. Like my sisters who are younger than me, they'll remember sometimes details about things that we did together that I completely forgot. And then if it comes to executing details, I'm not that great at that either, right? I can drop details just really, really easily. So I need detailed people around me, right? And that's something I've learned through the years. But, as you get a little older, with so much dementia and Alzheimer's going on, you get a little older and you start dropping those details, and then you start going, I wonder if I'm got early onset dementia or Alzheimer's or something. I was telling this to my friend of over 40 years, and kind of how I was a little bit concerned, and he looks at me and goes, nah, you've always been that way. I felt strangely comforted, It's like, oh, whew, good deal. I hadn't changed any, Yeah, so, friends can be iron sharpening iron, right? We need those kinds of friends. But on the flip side, sometimes friends can be toxic. I've actually had one really, really close friend that, oh my gosh, deep sense of betrayal, slandered me, all kinds of stuff. And it was one of the hardest things I'd ever dealt with because this person had been friends for decades. And then when I was at my lowest, I felt like I got a gut shot from a friend. And this is kind of what we're going to look at with Job right now. So just for those of you who didn't listen, this is the third message in this series. Job is, I think, probably a parable because it's written in poetry. Now, it could be rooted in a real historical story, but the way it's set up and the way it's ended and then the way it's written, it's in Hebrew poetry. And most of the time, that is a story that's similar to like a parable. It's like when Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan. Doesn't matter if that's actually historical or not. Was that me? Oh. I got voices in my head now. Now now, now, now I've got a whole nother problem. Anyway, so, but no, he was, help me, where was I at? Yeah, parables. So like the parable of the Good Samaritan, the teaching of that story, Jesus would make up stories to make points, right? And so this story could easily be a parable of that nature, or it could be rooted in history. I think either way, we're still dealing with the same thing. And so Job was this upright man who is portrayed as being super wealthy and was a follower of God with great integrity and was blameless, okay? And then there's this scene where, the adversary comes into the presence of God, and, God kind of like turns the whole thing on the Satan, the adversary, to challenge Job in his life. And all of a sudden, everything goes haywire in Job's life. He loses all of his wealth. 2 incidences that came through theft, robbery, and murder. He loses his cattle, he loses his sheep, he loses his camels. One of the disasters came through a natural calamity, like a fire that came down. And then another one came from something like a tornado, a wind that destroyed the house that all 10 of his kids were in, and all 10 of his kids died. And then if you follow the story, so he loses 10 children, not just one, 10. He loses all of his wealth, his cattle and everything, and then his own physical body breaks down under the stress, and he's got sores all over his body. So the picture is it's hard to imagine anything being worse that a person could encounter. I mean, this is one of the worst tragedies that a person could go through. And then we see Job's response, and if you missed last week, we talked about how in chapter 3, Job used every vocabulary word in the Hebrew language to describe the darkness that he was going through. Dark, 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 dark. Every metaphor of darkness. And then he even calls up the creatures of darkness, the swamp monster, the Leviathan. Well, then what we see is Job's friends come into the picture. The first thing Job's friends do is actually a pretty good thing. They do a sit. And they just sit with Job for 7 days in silence and are just with him, present with him, which is an awesome thing to do, by the way. If you have a friend that goes through deep, dark tragedy, just sit with them, be present with them, and you don't even have to speak words. That's a powerful, powerful thing. But after that 7 days, then Job's friends begin to speak. And what they speak is not very helpful. So in Job's book here, what we're looking at is how do we explain suffering and tragedy? And Job's friends are going to defend the principle of what we could call karma, if you're from certain traditions, or in the Bible it talks about reaping what you sow. What you put out comes back to you. If you sow good seeds, good things come back. If you sow wickedness, bad things can come back. And so that's what the book is dealing with, is how is it that you explain suffering when it happens to really, really good people? And disproportionate suffering as well. And so once Job's friends are silent, then they begin to speak. And what they speak isn't very helpful. The first one, Eliphaz. Eliphaz takes off and does a whole speech. If you look in Job chapter 4, verse 8, here's the crux of what he says. My experience shows me that those who plant trouble and cultivate evil will harvest the same. So they're defending that principle of reciprocity or karma, or you reap what you sow. He's basically saying, hey, Job, it's your stinking fault. All of this calamity that's fallen upon you, you must have done some wicked stuff, and it's all coming back on you now. So all of this stuff, Job, I hate to tell you, but it's your fault. Not so helpful, right? Second friend shows up, Bildad. Bildad shows up, and in chapter 8, verse 4, here's what Bildad says. Your children must have sinned against God, so their punishment was well deserved. You got 10 kids, they get wiped out by a tornado, and now you're going to blame it on the kids. Well, the kids sinned. Like they didn't make their bed. So God wipes them out with a tornado and kills them or something like that, right? So that wasn't too helpful. And then the third friend, Zophar, shows up. And Zophar has even a longer speech. Job 11, verse 2. Zophar says, shouldn't someone answer this torrent of words? In other words, Job put out his prayer of complaint, his prayer of darkness, his prayer of lament. And then Zophar responds, shouldn't someone answer this torrent of words? In other words, you've been spewing all of these words, Job. Shouldn't somebody answer this? Is a person proven innocent just by a lot of talking? See, he's pressing in on Job, saying, you talk so much, Job. And does that prove anything just because you're talking so much? Should I remain silent while you babble on? So Job's expressing his deep, deep hurt, pain, suffering. And then his friends is like going, man, you're talking too much, Job. You need to be quiet. You're just babbling on and on and on. Somebody else needs to talk. When you mock God, shouldn't someone make you ashamed? So now they're being frustrated at Job because Job is just expressing honest feelings of remorse and pain and darkness at the response to such an awful tragedy. And yet his friend Zophar is saying, you need to shut up and listen to me. All right? My beliefs are pure, and I am clean in the sight of God. If only God would speak. If only he would tell you what he thinks. If only he would tell you the secrets of wisdom, for true wisdom is not a simple matter. Listen, God is doubtless punishing you far less than you deserve. So he loses 10 kids, all of his wealth, and he's got sores on his bodies. And God should have done even worse to you because you deserved it, dude. How many of you would love a friend or two like that? Right? Who needs enemies when you have friends like that? So, how should we respond when people go through deep, dark difficulty in life? And by the way, let's just say all of us have experienced times when we did something stupid and then we had a direct consequence, right? But here, let me just say this. I'm talking about adult to adult. Even when somebody is sitting in their own mess, Job's friends aren't the best example of how to respond to that, all right? It's like, yeah, you're so stupid, dude. This would have never happened if you wouldn't done X, Y, and Z. And the person's sitting there going, yeah, I'm kind of sitting here in all my own mess, and I kind of smell it, and yeah, I can, thanks for your help, dude. It's just what I needed to hear today. It's all my fault, you know. But here we have a situation where this tragedy happens, and Job is an upright person, and there's nobody on the planet who understood the whole scene in Job's life that would have think Job would have ever deserved anything even half this much, let alone what he got. So how can we as friends respond to people who are in difficulty and tragedy, whether they're great people and just horrible things happen, or even if they've done some stuff and they're suffering some consequences from it? Sam Gallegos is our worship leader here at Living Water. Sam, I've grown to love Sam so much. He has a Master of Divinity degree. He's well-trained theologically. He's a great musician, musically trained. But his work full-time is a hospice chaplain. So every day of his work life, he's dealing with people in deep, dark crisis. And the training that hospice chaplains receive is amazing training. And I've learned just from hanging out with Sam, I think a depth to how to care for people. And so I asked Sam to come and give us some insight on how to be with people when they're in darkness and tragedy and that kind of thing, from a hospice perspective or a chaplain's perspective. Sam, thanks.
So one of the things that we ask in healthcare is, how's your pain? So it doesn't matter whether you're a nurse, physician, social worker, chaplain. That's something that we all do when we meet with a patient. And like Fred said, I'm a hospice chaplain, so I get the privilege and the honor of being with patients and families going through end of life. And if they're on hospice, they have a 6-month diagnosis that they're going to live for 6 months or less. So you can imagine who wants to do that, right? You know, in my life, I've been asked many, many times, how do you do that? How do you do that job? Another job I had for a long time was as a pastoral counselor. For many years, just in the counseling office in a church situation, people would always ask me, how do you sit and listen to people's problems all day? But what I've found is that there's something in the intention and heart of God for us as human beings that he means to release in our lives in response to pain that we call healing. But healing doesn't always take the form of fixing or the resolution of things. Sometimes it just means that there's some sort of a beautiful, powerful, transformative experience that we can have in the midst of pain if we experience actually what our brother shared this morning. We don't have to be anything but who we are. We can be our authentic self, and we can experience that pain and be alone in it and not alone in it. Both things. And what people ask me a lot is, you know, the thing that stops them from being with others in pain is this idea, well, what do I say? What do I do? Obviously, in the story of Job, it's like the bottom falls out and falls out again and falls out again, and finally it falls out with his friends don't know what to say, and then what they say is horrible, right? So we don't want to be that. We don't want to be that response. But what is the response? What is the fitting response? What is God calling us to do as children of God, as friends, as fellow human beings? And obviously the response is found in the incarnation, right? Ultimately, it's God was so empathetic to our suffering, our human suffering, that he became a human being to prove it to us, to sit with us in our pain, to be like us, kind of like Eve coming to Adam. It's not good for man to be alone, so I'm going to make someone like you who can be with you and be of great help to you. And there's this word in the New Testament, in the Greek, parakletos, which is actually kind of the foundation of the theology of pastoral care. What it means is to be with someone. It's actually the word used for Jesus in 1 John. It's the word used for the Holy Spirit in the gospel accounts. That there's somebody who's with us. And that withness is really it. That's all you need to do, is be with somebody. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to fix anything. In fact, there are situations that cannot be fixed. And actually, there is great dignity in the fact that the beauty of our lives is not just wrapped up in the goodness and the positive things that we can experience, but actually even our pain itself describes the great worth and dignity that we each have as human beings. The reason it hurts so bad is because we mean so much. And so to be with someone is to just highlight with another human presence that that person means so much. And so a few thoughts. There's an old book called Connecting by a clinical psychologist named Larry Crabb. He said this, highly trained PhD. He said, in recent days, I've made a shift. I'm now working towards the day when communities of God's people, ordinary Christians whose lives regularly intersect, will accomplish most of the good that we now depend on mental health professionals to provide. Now, this was a profound and unrealized dream, and this may not be realized before Jesus returns to the earth. And I love mental health professionals. But he said this, I'm looking for the day when ordinary Christians whose lives regularly intersect will accomplish most of the good we depend now on mental health professionals to provide, and they will do it by connecting with one another in ways that only the gospel makes possible. What does that mean? Jesus said it like this: greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. The ancients actually believed the highest form of love was friendship. It's because there is something in, I have this picture of a child, an abused child, sitting on his front steps in pain after that hurt, and just another neighbor kid just coming over and just putting his arm around him and saying nothing. So what is it that we can do to help? Be present. We represent the God who is an ever-present help in time of need just by being undistracted. And that's it. Just by listening well. Fred Rogers said, listening is where love begins. Listening to ourselves, to our neighbors. And it looks like this. Number one, we're not called to care for others by solving their problems. Instead, we're called to recognize and communicate, sometimes even without words, that that person is more than the problem or pain that they're facing. That's the goal. This pain is real. It's unfixable. But you're more than this circumstance. And I just want to say that to you. And with or without words. The care is not necessarily in the help that you give someone, but it's in the relationship that you provide. It's not in the advice, it's not in the fixing. It's in the fact that you're just there. I had a professor say, as evangelical Christians, which we are or are not, it doesn't matter. A lot of times we're taught to do something, to evangelize, but actually he said our primary witness as children of God is withness, just being with people. In Isaiah 53, it talks about Jesus, this prophetic thing of his suffering. And it says this powerful phrase, it says that he was a man of sorrow, familiar with suffering, like one from whom men hide their faces. Often pain, the knee-jerk reaction is to turn away, to wince. But actually, according to clinical research, the number one thing that causes our relationships to be healing is turning towards rather than away. So turning towards rather than away. And let yourself be influenced by what this person is experiencing, and let it change you. Because the therapeutic effect of the healing relationship is reciprocal. We're not there to, Jesus or the Apostle Paul would say, lift each other's burdens, love one another as I have loved you. Well, it's not a matter of like, okay, I'm the strong one coming to you, weak one, and lifting you up. It's two weak ones together being lifted up by the power of that interaction in which the Holy Spirit is the one that actually changes things, not us. I used to pray every time I went into a pastoral counseling session. I would say, God, I just let go of all the help and all the things I have to say and all the things I think, and just you help us. And I'm going to sit here with this person in their pain and be a recipient too of the help that I also desperately need. So you may be surprised if you've ever sat with someone how much it affects you and transforms you as well. Does that make sense? So look forward actually not to giving, but receiving. Pay attention. See what God wants to do, because he's already at work. That's the last thing I'll say. Because he's an ever-present help in time of need, he's not surprised. He's already there. He's already doing stuff. And our job is just to try to pay attention to what we see that God might already be doing and be a part of that rather than a detractor from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, many of you know, and some of you are new here, but I went through an extreme time of darkness several years ago. And what it felt like was, what I would say is it almost felt like an atheistic void. I couldn't feel God's presence like I'd felt in my previous life. And it felt so dark. And I got into a recovery group. And I remember sitting in the recovery group and people would go around the circle who had been in a similar place of darkness and were vulnerable and shared what they were going through. They just got vulnerable and were honest and shared what they were going through. And you could go around the circle and it could be male, female, black, white, gay, straight, rich, poor. But as you go around that circle and just get real and honest and vulnerable, you all of a sudden realize you're not alone. And that's when I felt God's Spirit in those circles of vulnerability. And I couldn't hardly feel God any other way. But when I sat in those circles of vulnerability, that's when I felt the Spirit of God. We're not alone. Sam's going to lead us in a reflection song. So let's meditate on this together.